for what promises, I think, to be a very interesting session. We are very much grateful to the Department for Interethnic Relations for the session which they have put together for us today. This is a version of a conference that I attended in February on the anniversary of the end of slavery in Romania. But there were very few other diplomatic colleagues present who were able to be present at that event. And therefore we have been working with the Department and the State Secretary to provide a briefing again on a wide range of Roma-related issues, which is what we had in February in the first place. The context, of course, is one of a special difficulty for Roma people in Romania during the COVID pandemic. But it's also a year in which there is celebration to be had, because this is the anniversary, the 165th anniversary of the end of Roman slavery in Romania. That provokes all sorts of questions about what happens after slavery finishes. Do you transit from slavery straight into complete freedom and equality of rights? And that's one of the things I know that we'll be discussing today. It's also the 50th anniversary of the Orpington Declaration, which was the first global set of decisions about Roman identity that was possible, where decisions were made at that London conference on questions like the Roma anthem, the Roma flag, and other elements of Roma identity, and you will hear about that very much today. For us in the UK, there's another thing that we need to celebrate that we didn't know about in February. We have just had our local elections a week last Thursday, and there were 3 Romanian origin councillors elected for the first time in the modern era. We've had Romanian background politicians in the past, including one former leader of the Conservative Party, Michael Howard. But this is the first time that people who lived the early part of their lives as Romanians in Romania and have gone to the UK recently. So to get 3 councillors elected was a great success. And the fact that one of them is also a member of the Roma community is a particular joy. There is an element of inclusion happening in that which, as I say, we want to celebrate. I'm going to start talking very briefly. You will see from the programme, probably with alarm, that we're planning to go on until 2 o'clock. We know that very many of you will not have bargained for quite so much richness in discussion, and we are therefore going to do our absolute utmost to get all that content into a period of time which lasts about 2 hours from now. So if you can stay with us till 1 o'clock, that would be really tremendous. But we, of course, understand that you all have busy lives and other priorities, and therefore if you do need to leave, don't feel bad, but do feel good about being here in the first place, and I hope you will have other rich conversations as a result of the connections that you're able to make today. But if I may now hand over to our real host, the State Secretary in the Department of Interethnic Relations, and my friend, the word is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me salute you and welcome you here today. This is, as Your Excellency said, we are the hosts of this event. We are not the stars of this event. I would like to thank you for you being here, but especially to the guests, the speaking guests, who again accepted our invitation to have these discussions again. As His Excellency mentioned earlier, we had this discussion in February. We consider that not only based on the activities of the department in the past year in the context of COVID-19 pandemic and the rise of the hate speech in society, but also because of the topics that were discussed, both on historic reconciliation, both on the legal framework and the mechanisms that we can also as state institutions, NGOs, and other members, other actors of the society we can do to do better. We invited some speakers who we believe that can offer you very interesting points of discussions, and we are very thankful to your embassy for having this cooperation, this wonderful cooperation, because I believe that this is the only way we know that one discussion will not change the world, will not change the society, but it will surely bring us a step closer to what we want to achieve, which is much more accepting and diverse society with reduced discrimination and negative attitudes towards minorities. I would like to also thank my colleagues who are somewhere here in this room, and I will give, if you allow me to do that, because we are a little bit late and I understand that we have to rush a little bit the discussions, to Ms. Delia Grigore, I can see her, and to the speakers of the first panel.
Mulțumesc tare mult Departamentului pentru Relații Interetnice și Ambasadei Marii Britanii în România, pentru că își propun să continue această dezbatere ocazionată de celebrarea a 165 de ani de la eliberarea romilor din sclavie în România, în țările române medievale, și care este totodată și o comemorare a romilor victime de sutelor de ani de sclavie, mai bine de 500 de ani. I will switch to English now. So I thank you very much to the Department of Interethnic Relations and to the Embassy of Great Britain for continuing the debate, the discussion on the abolishment of slavery, on celebrating 165 years from this moment, and to see the past from the perspective of the present, and to try to look in the future from this moment on. I have the pleasure to moderate this session in which we will discuss very important points, addressing and confronting the legacy of the Roma slavery towards a better understanding of the historical and social context of the Roma minority, and also on the importance of the historical reconciliation in terms of strengthening the social and ethnic stigma of the Roma minority. My two very important colleagues will speak about the most tragic period, times in the Roma history in Romania, slavery and Holocaust. I dare before them to speak a little bit about the racism of domination and the cultural colonization of the Roma in Romania up to the present date. The Romanian state signed in Paris on 9th of December 1919 the Treaty Looking for Minorities. Very important and very modern document reflecting the rights that were given to the minorities in the new state, in the new Romania that included Transylvania. After the union in December, in 1st of December the year ago in 1918. So after 1 year, Romania signed this treaty, and there were recognized very important rights of the national minorities. We look in this document and we see it is very modern for that age and even for today. The minority minorities had the right to use their language, and they were supported by the state to do so in justice, in education, in administration, and also they were supported to teach their minority language in schools, in public schools, and they were supported to develop themselves and to participate to political decision in the state. The only thing is that the Roma were not recognized in 1919 through this treaty as a national minority. They were recognized, the Hungarian and the German minorities, and also the Jewish minority. So the Roma were totally ignored, in spite of the fact that the Roma were the second minority that recognized the inclusion of Transylvania in Romania, the Union, because on 8th of January 1919 there was a declaration from Mediaș when the German minority recognized, happily recognized the Union, and immediately after that, in 2 weeks, on 16th of January 1919, at Rupea, the Roma were the second national minority that recognized the Great Union. And there was a county meeting in Târnava Mare, this was the name of the county, and there were around 800 participants, and Roma happily recognized the Union, and they, after that, in a few months, on 27th of April 1919, it was a national reunion of the Roma in Transylvania, in Ibaș-Fălău, Sibiu, when many delegations from 5 counties, there were 89 participants, they expressed again their solidarity to the Romanian people and to the Union, and they expressed their fidelity to the Romanian. They said that we are, the Roma in those times, good citizens. We fought for Romania. We gave our blood in the fights for the independence of Romania, and we are not nomads. They wanted to underline they are not nomads. We are not bad. We are good. We are loyal to the crown. We are loyal to the Romanian and to the Romanians, and we want to have equal rights with the Romanian citizens. We want to be citizens, and we want the name, this insult, this bad name, this pejorative name of Țigan to be erased from the public space and to be named in another name, but not in this name, with this name. And we want access to land. We want property, to own land, if possible, and to participate to any public developments, the church, the school, the army, and to be a part of Romania, of big Romania. So they were very open, and they liked very much, and they expressed very much this loyalty, this fidelity, and this love for the land and for the Romanians. In spite of that, ignored, totally ignored by the public policies, ignored by the treaty for minorities in 1990, totally ignored, as if they did not exist. Not to speak about the policies after the abolishment of slavery, actually no policies for the integration of the Roma that were emancipated. They were named emancipated from slavery, and there were no policies for them to integrate actually in the society. But for this subject, my colleague Adrian Nicolae Fortuna will speak more, because he will speak on the slavery, on the subject of slavery. We know, and it is not the first time when I speak in public, about the image of the Roma in the Romanian folklore, that is a very bad image, very pejorative, and if we study all the anthologies of folklore, of Romanian folklore, we can see that the Roma are seen as cursed, as bad, as anti-heroes, that if you touch a Rom, you will become yourself impure. And we can see it, this point of view, this vision, this view, beginning with the Julius Caesar anthology of folklore in the beginning of the 20th century, and of course after that we will see until today in the, let's say, Yonki Moyu's anthologies of folklore, speaking about different stories about Roma, different proverbs about Roma, where the Roma are seen as less human or not human, and they are seen as somebody that, as a people that is cursed and is not good. And there are many examples about that. The Tsigan is not human. The Tsigan is guilty of the fact of the Jesus tragedy, because they were the ones making making for him that he was put on the cross, and they stole one of that things, and that's why he suffered more. Jesus suffered more, and there are many other types of curses on the Roma, especially underlined the fact that Roma are impure and are not human. This is very important in the Romanian folklore, unfortunately. And from this point of view, after 500 years of slavery and after no policies of integration, it was a very short time of emancipation. I mean, between the two world wars, some Roma organizations, like the General Roma Union and other, began to organize themselves, and there were some newspapers of the Romas, such the Romas Voice and others. But unfortunately, even this movement, this beginning of the Roma movement, was not so much clear with their objectives. Of course, we can see, and this is good, in the Voice of the Roma, in this newspaper, we can see dreams such as Roma Museum, Roma School, programs for Roma crafts, like we see today, Roma craftsmen and crafts. We can see ideas about Romani language, we can see good things, we can see social programs between the two world wars let's give an example, in the 1930s. But even though the Roma movement, even with these aspirations and dreams, chose to have an alliance with the far-right movement in Romania, unfortunately, because they thought that this way maybe they will save themselves or they will be protected. And we can see in the Voice of the Roma in 1940, only 2 years before the Holocaust, before the deportation of Roma in Transnistria, and only 1 year before the deportation of the Jews in Transnistria. So in 1940, we can see in the Voice of the Roma newspaper, we can see an excellent article praising and speaking very well about the Antonescu, Marshal Antonescu. So this is very sad, no? We can see that they say he is a very good patriot and he is good for Romania and they like him. It was wrong, but this was the position they wanted to take, thinking maybe about their protection, I mean as Roma. But unfortunately, again, like in 1919, even if they said, we are with you, we are with your king, with your with the head of your state, again, it didn't lead to anything good for Roma, because after saying that this Antonescu Mareșal is very good for Romania and they like him and it's good, they were deported. After 2 years, but of course during these 2 years persecutions came. After 2 years they were deported in Transnistria to be killed, to be exterminated. But on this subject, on this topic again, our colleague Marius Tuta will speak more. We'll speak about the Eugenics and about the point of view of the Romanian intellectuals, Romanian writers, Romanian doctors, Romanian sociologists during that times that justify scientifically, between inverted commas, the deportation of these two minorities that were bad for Romania, the Jews and the Roma. And they wrote very much about that, but I'm not going to speak about that now because our colleague will do. Then, again, another type of slavery during the Socialist Regime, because slavery continues, in my opinion, even today. Because 60 years of socialism meant for Roma two things. One good thing and one bad thing. The good thing was that it was the first time in the Romanian history when the Roma were, or it was let's say an attempt, not very successful, but an attempt to integrate, to economically and socially integrate the Roma, but as Romanians, not as Roma. Some Roma took advantage and rejecting their own identity, totally rejecting and erasing it from the memory of their families. They chose to be Romanians and to integrate themselves in the society, to go to school because it was for free, to go to work because it was possible to go to work, it was even compulsory, and to try to be communist, socialist, to try to be citizens, to try to be Romanians. And many of our families succeeded in a way, up to some point, because they were not accepted in the very high hierarchy of the state, only in the middle somewhere. But somewhere in the middle was better than not being recognized as a person or as a human being. It was better than the slavery, it was better than the Holocaust, of course, when the extermination meant killing physically the Roma. Now it was another type of ethnocide, cultural one, because everything that was good, musicians, huge musicians during the communist, during the socialist regime came, huge arts, but everything that was good for coming from the Roma was considered Romanian. All the names, big names, Albeșteanu, Biononoriu, Gabi Luncă, Romica Puceanu. I can say there are huge numbers, and not only numbers, but huge personalities of the Roma, especially in arts and music, but also writers, also big lawyers, doctors, everybody. During the socialist regime, it was possible for the Roma to become these personalities, to develop as such, but nobody was recognized as Roma. Everywhere it was seen, written, and in the public space they were seen as totally as Romanians. So this was the price to pay. A colonization, a cultural colonization of the Roma. And now coming in today's contemporary history, after 1990, of course, we were recognized finally, first time in history, as national minority. First time in history. And there are rights in the Constitution protecting our cultural identity, rights for teaching our language in the school, and it is taught in some schools, rights to have also cultural institutions. We have one, only one in Romania, the National Center for Roma Culture, Romano Care. very marginalized and very, with a very low budget, very marginalized institution. And this is all we have, teaching the Romani language and cultures in some schools, and this National Center for Roma Culture. So we are a national minority, de jure, but de facto we are not. We are the second national minority as number in Romania, as I know. We will see next year in the census. But we are far from enjoying our cultural rights in Romania. There is no museum, no theater, and many other things. And of course, what we have this very low, unfortunately, very low self-image, very still negative self-image, that we see that now in the pandemic crisis became even worse, because what we see and we saw, and the research of the Departamentul, pentru Interethnic Relations shows also increase of racism, because after the recognition of the Roma as a national minority in the 90s, there was a huge increasing of the interethnic conflicts and of the police abuses in the Roma communities in the 90s. We can remember Hădăreni, Mihai Cocălnicianu, Bolentin. Now, after so many years, after 30 years, again, we see again hate speech in the media. We see again police violences, huge violences and abuses in the Roma community. We see again that the society sees us as the ones that spread the virus, that do not cope with the rules, and we are again the scapegoat of the society. Again, as it was in all our history in Romania. So as a conclusion, in my opinion, the slavery continues. It's not about the juridical slavery that stopped in 1856, let's say, from the law point of view. It's not about the fact that we were recognized as a national minority in 1990. It's about the state of mind of the Roma, the state of mind that includes negative image, stigma, and self-stigma, and about the view of the society towards Roma that is still very deeply marked by racism and by hate, and by the view that Roma are inferior, that Roma are the ones that dare to play that inferior music manele with a big, huge singer, Loredana Groza. This is the last very recent point, that Loredana Groza, very well-known singer, dared to sing with the Roma singer, the maneliști, these inferior beings. How does she dare to do so? So this is racism, this is pure racism, pure hate, and slavery continues. So, last word, we should do something, but not only us, the Roma, we should do together. It's the state, the Romanian state, that stigmatized and put us to slavery and to Holocaust and to ethnocide during the Socialist Regime. So it's the state responsibility to do with us, of course, not for us, with us, everything possible to destigmatize and decolonize our minds and souls. Thank you very much, and now I invite, through Zoom I understood online, our colleague Marius Turda to speak about the Holocaust, the context of the eugenic view and the context of the Holocaust against the Roma in Romania. and then our colleague Adrian Nicolai Fortuna, but first Marius Duda, please. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Am I being heard? There's a very loose connection between London and Bucharest at the moment. I assume it's not political at all. I hope you could hear me well. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to say a few words to your discussion about stigma and how it affects the Roma minority. I appreciate the invitation, and it's good to see some of my friends and esteemed colleagues, both virtually and in the room. Now, as Delia pointed out, we are facing a very important moment in coming to terms with what I suppose is necessary in Romania and elsewhere to face not only the rise of racism and anti-Roma attitudes, but obviously a more profound deterioration, if you wish, of social relations caused by the current pandemic. We can see societies being on the brink of profound transformations, and we people in academia, equally with people in the civil society, and politicians need to react swiftly but firmly to prevent forms of political radicalism from emerging. Now, I should like to start by saying a few words about stigma, because I think that's very important in the current conversation about anti-Roma racism in Romania. As most of you know, stigma refers, at least what sociologists would tell you refers to the situation of the individual who is disqualified from full social acceptance. So a stigmatized individual is basically an individual who is not fully accepted as a member of the community. It misses something. It could be a physical attribute he or she misses. It could be an intellectual attribute. It could be something related to the way he or she looks or behaves. Now, the word is, again, some of you know, comes from ancient Greek, and the Greeks were very good at profoundly explaining their distrust and distaste for certain categories of people. For ancient Greeks, stigma referred to bodily functions in many ways and signs. So if you're a stigmatized individual, an ancient Greek society would basically mark you as such. So you are a polluted, you are someone to be avoided, you are someone to live at the margin of society. You're never allowed to come in the community again. So it's something that you show, and you are being branded, you are stamped, if you wish, in order to indicate your condition. Now, of course, with Christianity, this changed, and the whole discussion about stigma within Christianity is very different. But then from the 17th century onwards, particularly with the development of two important historical phenomena, on the one hand, the creation of the nation states, and on the other hand, the development of rationalism and science, stigma is being returned to, in a way, to the ancient Greek definition. Basically, we advertise through stigma that there is a member of our community, or indeed groups of people who are not wanted. We stigmatize them. Now, nation states, from the very beginning, use stigma as a way of creating an internal process whereby those who are deemed to be members of the community are full-fledged members and deserve to be respected as such. And those who are minorities, be that ethnic or religious or gender or otherwise minorities who are not wished at all within the territory of the country, have to be eliminated, pushed aside, repressed. So the nation state tries to create a homogeneous national community, as you know. So that continues from the 17th century onwards to this day. And we have numerous examples in history about how the nation state and the modern state uses stigma to promote one particular group and then marginalizes another group. Now you have the development of science and particularly the development of anthropology, sociology, comparative linguistics, literary criticism, which again uses stigma to identify groups of people who are worthy, important, creators of civilization, creators of empire, and so on and so forth. That brand of scholarship too uses stigma as a mechanism of identification, segregation, and marginalization. And we could see that developing in the 19th and early 20th century with racial anthropology, eugenics, and so forth. So that's very important to keep in mind, because when we talk about the Roma in Romanian history, and we talk about the Roma in contemporary Romanian society, we could see that process of stigmatization at work very widely, and we could still see it at work today. And it's important to understand these two traditions. One that comes from the creation of Romania as a state and how the Roma were integrated into the Romanian state. Secondly, it comes from the foundation of Romanian identity, which is cultural, religious, scientific, and so on and so forth, which again promoted a certain image of who is the Romanian, how is the Romanian to be defined, and where does the Roma fit into this image. So these very important traditions have not been dismantled, have not been critiqued, have not been exposed for their inherent racism and for their inherent internal colonialism. There is a form of internal Orientalism that works in Romania, has been working since the 19th century, not only with respect to the Roma, but with respect to the way Romanian regions, which later become Romania, are being construed historically and culturally and intellectually. The relationship between Transylvania and Moldova and Wallachia, and which one is to be considered as the vanguard of Romanian culture and civilization. So there are so many layers that have to be unpacked in order to understand how profoundly dispersed the entire argument about the other in Romanian society is. Someone who has worked like Delia on folklore has a better understanding of how that process of discrimination, marginalization, exclusion, and the formation of the other works, the mentality of the common people, how it's being formulated in songs and proverbs and attitudes that are being disseminated widely at the grassroots of society rather than in high culture. But to say something about education, which to me is the most important thing when it comes to discussing the Roma and anti-Roma racism in Romania, and indeed when it comes to finding a way to fight it. You know, the real labor of education begins with a question and finding an answer to it. And I think we need to ask the important questions about the Romanian past. We need to ask what it meant to be a Roma slave, what impact it had on the Roma themselves, how that in turn created a power relations, social context, and indeed shaped the identification not only of the Roma as a group which may or may not belong, but of the Romanians themselves. Because this is what stigma does after all. Stigma not only stigmatizes and constructs reality of the stigmatized, it also benefits people who use its stigma as a method of identification. So it's interesting to ask how stigma affects and had affected the Roma, but it's equally important to understand how stigma had benefited the Romanians. So that's one question. And slavery is one important topic that has to be discussed. Many Romanians are still unaware of the fact that until 1856, the Roma were enslaved for centuries, for 5 centuries. They don't understand that slavery had existed in the territories which are now Romania, and then there were slaves belonging to the monasteries, the ruling elites, the ruling princes, and so on and so forth. And they are very surprised. We celebrated or commemorated Roma slavery last year and this year, and I've seen interviews with Romanians on the street who were completely oblivious to that to that part of their history. So that's extremely important. So when they hear about slavery, they say, well, of course we know about slavery. You know, the British had slaves in the colonies. We know about American slaves in North America, and we know about slaves in South America, in Brazil, but they don't know anything about the Roma slaves in Romania. So that's one important tradition that we need to come to terms with. The uncomfortable episodes related to Romanian history, and that has to start with coming to terms with slavery. What is even more problematic to me, I suppose, education is an ongoing process, and I suppose things will improve and are improving gradually. But if you look at how children are segregated in schools, Roma children are segregated in schools, you understand the pervasiveness of stigmatization of the Roma that goes all the way to the very early ages of childhood. The Romanians know that the Roma are different. They know they are not different in terms of the color of their skin, but they know they're different in the way they smell or the way they dress. Or there's something peculiar about that child. And the immediate psychological reflex a Romanian child would have would be like, oh, because he's Roma. Now, how do we dismantle that profoundly embedded a form of stigmatization that is so pervasive in Romanian society from an early age, and then it continues all the way into adulthood? And you could hear people who should know better speaking about that without any self-criticism and without any awareness of how profoundly problematic that is and how offensive that is to Romanian citizens of Roma origin. You hear politicians talking, well, what do you expect of these people because they have a slave mentality, they can't shake it off, as if it is the fault of the Roma. There is something inherently ontological about the Roma, they can't shake it off. And they are to be blamed for what's happening to them, because we, the majority, tried everything possible, but it didn't pay off. So I don't have time to discuss this. It's been addressed by many competent people, and some of them are here with us today. How important is this to come to terms with that? But there is another aspect, and one to which I contributed to some extent in my research, which is about the Holocaust, and it's about racism. And of course, that's a very equally problematic issue, because the Holocaust education in Romania is very different in the way that it is in England. In England, Holocaust education is compulsory. So in many ways, of course, you may decide to do it in different ways, but it is compulsory to talk about the Holocaust and to talk about racial hygiene and to talk about eugenics. You do it in schools. Whilst, of course, in Romania, this is not the case. Which is in a way paradoxical if you think that actually Romania did participate in the Holocaust, did exterminate the Roma, and did exterminate the Jews. Britain didn't do that. But that's a matter of how education is being perceived in these two different countries. So first and foremost, there is no proper discussion about the Holocaust in Romanian schools that allows the children to understand not necessarily it's not about shaming the Romanian state per se. It's about understanding a historical, complex historical phenomenon and how that impacted not only the Roma and their subsequent history since 1940 all the way to present day, but actually changed profoundly the history of Romania and of the Romanians. So coming to terms with your own past. So that's one thing. And of course, there's nothing about racism during the 1930s and 40s. There's nothing about eugenics and how the Roma, since 1900s, were described as, on the one hand, inferior people because they belong to a non-European race, as it were. They migrated centuries ago, and they were considered to be of an inferior racial group. But more importantly, of course, is that by contaminating the host, society, they contributed significantly to the weakening of the Romanian nation, of the Romanian racial body. So the eugenicists spent a great deal of time in the 1920s and 30s conducting profound and sophisticated research to demonstrate that, intellectually speaking, the Roma have innate inability to understand complex things. It is impossible for them to excel at anything else which is not natural. For example, they're very good with playing the violin because this is a sign of their natural nature, because they are very good with imitating sounds. They're very close to nature, and they're more or less like, primitive people who are unable to articulate anything sophisticated. So you have this research being done in the 1920s and 30s about the Roma population in Romania. You have another kind of research which becomes very problematic and expands in the 1930s and 1940s with the Holocaust. It's basically, okay, well, it's not just about exotic groups of Roma living in Romania. It's basically about them mixing with the Romanian population and basically ruining completely the quality of the Romanian nation. And that you have it formulated very clearly by Sabin Manuila, who was the director of, as you know, the director of the Institute for National Institute of Statistics, a very close collaborator of Ion Antonescu, and indeed the leader of a team of scientists who prepared not only the details about how we can categorize and qualify and catalog people, which was very important, of course, during the deportation. So who do we deport? Let's deport the asocial elements, or parasites, or people who have a criminal nature. Who defined the criminal nature of an individual? Who defined the social parasite? It wasn't Ion Antonescu. Ion Antonescu just gave the order, and you have an army of people from the head of the police to the last functionary in the village who said, well, these are the problem individuals. Some of them defined ethnically, some of them defined socially. But who created the vocabulary? Who created the arguments? Who created the foundation for these policies to be implemented? Well, scientists such as Manuila and others. And Manuila declares very simply, we have a major eugenic and racist problem in Romania, and this is the gypsy problem. We have been since the 19th century, we've been completely overrun by the Roma, who infiltrated, particularly in the south and in the east of Romania, all where you have more sedentary Roma population than, say, in Transylvania, or more nomadic Roma. They infiltrated completely the fabric of the Romanian society, to the point now that if we don't intervene, it will be too late. So you have that very clearly expressed. So how is it possible that we are not still able to come to terms with these very serious issues? That baffles me, and it troubles me in a way, because obviously when we look at how the population reacts and how the Roma are being perceived in a very sort of non-academic way. So when you walk on the streets of Bucharest or Timișoara or Brașov, what have you, and you hear absolutely horrible anti-Roma expressions being pronounced by equally by common people and educated people, you realize that has completely transformed the Romanian psyche. And to get rid of that, to really engage with the proper process of education and acceptance, requires a significant understanding of the past. Ultimately, notwithstanding the amazing work done by NGOs and by social activists, without a good knowledge of history, we can't move forward. The society cannot, after a certain period of time, they will have to come to terms with the fact that, yes, in the 1940s, Romania wanted to get rid of their Roma and Jewish population. It was a program of extermination. It was genocide. It was Holocaust. We have to say it and then find a way to move forward, educate the younger generations to understand that that is something that has to be done. So to address the social and ethnic stigma requires, as I would argue, a good knowledge of history, and it's not easy, and it's not pleasant, and it's not always to the benefit of the Romanian character, because of course Romanians like to describe themselves as tolerant, as inclusive, as very generous, as very hospitable, and many Romanians are generous, many Romanians are hospitable, and they are tolerant, but there are others who aren't. And there are many instances for the past 2 centuries where actually it was very clear that the Roma were continuously and perpetually attacked for representing alterity, for representing a different type of humanity, for being non-human, for being primitive, for being dirty, for being vectors of disease, for carrying from everything from syphilis to the destructions of the Romanian culture. They were accused constantly of undermining the Romanian success. Romania couldn't become a great nation because of the Roma. Instead of saying that maybe we have to look deeper, and maybe the reasons why there are failures on behalf of the Romanian state and on behalf of the Romanians are not related to the Roma, maybe they are related to ourselves. So we need to move that, and then we get to even more interesting chapter, which I'll only briefly allude to because Delia already said a few words about that, which is the communist period. Ultimately, discussing slavery and the Holocaust has its importance in terms of education and historical knowledge. But there's another aspect to history which continues in a very different way, which is what happened during communism, where you have a very interesting and quite distorted transformation of Romanian racism, which is very peculiar because on the one hand, you have some clear benefits in terms of inclusion, assimilation, and promotion and uplifting, if you wish. At the same time, this is mostly on the surface. At the very deep echelons of Romanian society, the transformation has been extremely limited. In fact, the entire socialist idea of constructing a new person and the social rhetoric of what is to be a worthy Romanian, a worthy socialist member of society was very much created by the eugenic tradition and by the eugenicists, playing with keywords which stigmatize immediately those who didn't like to work, and of course we knew who were the people who didn't like to work. Those who you give them a flat, or you give them a house or accommodation in the city, will bring their horses with them, are unable to use modern forms of hygiene properly. So entire rhetoric, if you read the literature produced under socialism in Romania about how can we come to terms with the asocial elements, with the problems we have in our socialist society, you realize the difference between that language and the language of the interwar period, which was very clearly racist, the difference is minimal. Ultimately, the scapegoating of the Roma continued uninterrupted, the marginalization of the Roma continued uninterrupted, notwithstanding, of course, some very important moments which allowed for key figures in the Roma community to go to university, to receive an education, and to overcome the innate racism of the Romanian society. Now, I know I'm running out of time, and I don't want to test your patience in any ways. I don't know whether you could hear it, but it's absolutely pouring down here. It rains so heavily that actually it deafens my speech. What can we do to overcome these many forms of stigma? Stigma which is social and stigma which is cultural. I alluded already to education. I think this is still the way forward, and I salute any possibility to improve on that educational agenda, whether it comes from the civic society or from institutions such as, you know, the British Library or the government, Romanian government. And these are absolutely commendable and much needed initiatives. But there's something else as well that we need to address, I suppose, which is, you know, the proper decolonization of the Romanian national narrative. And that has to be done by people who are able to really confront head-on the problematic history of Romania. We need to accept that intersectional approaches are probably important, because there is a serious discrimination going on against the Roma women in a way the Roma men are not subjected to. So there's a very important gender element to how the stigma works against the Roma people in Romania and elsewhere. And I spent some time working on sterilization of Roma women. And it's absolutely clear that the way both, you know, the population and then the state tries to deals with the Roma issue is basically by targeting Roma women. And so gender is extremely important. So that has to be brought forward in a more concise and more critical way. And then finally, and I will leave you with that, we don't know how the situation is going to pan out after this terrible disease and terrible pandemic is over. But we do have a chance now to really rearrange the pillars of our conversation, to rethink the parameters of how seriously we are committed to anti-racism, and how much we can do in terms of avoiding banalities and superficial political proclamations about inclusivity and about equality. It's about time that we are honest and we return to a more simplistic, maybe paideia form of interaction, which allows us to be to look at each other and accept that we haven't done very well with the majority. We haven't done very well as the Romanian society. We haven't done too much as a European society, and we haven't done very well in many other respects. But at the same time, there is a genuine commitment. There is a genuine commitment to progress. There is a genuine commitment for all of us to change this. And this conversation today is yet another example of how seriously determined we are as a group of people to move things forward. So thank you very much.
I thank you very much. We thank you very much for this excellent presentation as always. I just want to draw the conclusions. My conclusion is that scientists are as guilty as the politicians when it comes to any policies of any type against the group, and including the Holocaust, because scientists, so-called scientists, justify the decision taken by the politicians. So Sabine Manuila, and Ion Antonescu, we put down the Ion Antonescu statues in Romania, but we have only 5 years ago, and this is what I wanted to show to you now, just one idea. I wanted to show to you the school in Sâmboten, This is the school in Sâmboten, in Arad County, where in 2016, only 5 years ago, it was very big ceremony of raising up the statue of Sabine Manuila, and the name of the school in his native village is the name of Sabine Manuila. So this is the Romania of today. I leave to you the comments and the reflection. I go straight to Adrian Nicolae Fortuna, councillor at the National Center for Roma Culture, Romani Care, speaking about slavery and its consequences upon the stigmatization
stigmatization of the Roma identity in Romania. Thank you.
Thank you, Delia. Thank you for the invitation to the British Embassy. Thank you for the invitation also to the Department for Interethnic Relations. My name is Nicolae Furtuna. I'm a sociologist. Currently, I'm working in the research department of the National Center of Roma Culture, and also I'm writing my PhD thesis in sociology on the social memory of Roma state. So I will make use in my presentations from two of my last works. So that means that I will read something. I will try to make a brief understanding between the link between social stigma and history, like also Professor Marius Buda mentioned. So I will start my presentation with a quote from a very important work that was written in the 18th century by one of the most illuminated princes of Moldova, Interethnic. So I will share with you what he's writing about Roma, because it's very interesting to see how the Roma were seen in that period. So he's writing in the description of Moldova the following words. Gypsies are spread here and there in all Moldova, and you cannot see a boyar without owning some gypsies about. From where and when did these people come in Moldova? Even they do not know, and there is nothing written in our chronicle about them. All gypsies from all regions have the same language, which is mixed with Greek words and probably with Persian. They have no other occupation but blacksmith and goldsmith. They have the same aspect and customs as the gypsies from other countries. Their most important characteristics and what distinguish them from others are idleness and running. So it's very interesting to see how a prince and also intellectual of from the period of 18th century described also the Roma. So we can see that they are exotic because no one knows nothing about them. So what we can understand is the fact that Roma become more exotic because their history wasn't written. So after a very short period, in Wallachia was published a code of laws under the Prince Karaja in 1818. So after almost 30 years after the writing of Dimitrie Cantin. So in this code of laws, there is a chapter especially for slaves and gypsies. And I want to present you the first main articles from this law, because I think it's very important to understand what the slavery was in that period. And also it's very important to understand the fact that in Romanian principalities, the slavery was established by laws know that it was a legalist system. And in 1818, this law of the Fanarian princes established the first articles that were speaking directly about the slaves. So the first article from this law says that all the slaves are somebody's property. This is the status of the gypsies in Valaquia. Second article, all people born from slaves shall remain slaves. All born from a slave mother shall be slaves. So the slavery was eradicated. A gypsy's master has no power over his life. But we found in archives also many cases in which this article was not respected, in the sense that we found archive documents in which the master just he killed his slaves. A gypsy's master is free to sell or donate him. So this is in a few words what I wanted to why I wanted to give this information about Roma slavery, because in general people don't know nothing about the fact that in Romania existed a legal system a legal system that was special, referred to the situation of the Roma. Now I want to speak a little bit about the way in which the Roma slavery it's underlined in the historiography from Romania. So in Romania, the academic discussions regarding Roma slavery are still in their early stages. Existing literature favors political and legal developments during the first half of the 19th century, particularly the abolitionist measures and emancipatory laws adopted by Moldova and Valaquia. Studies concerning the Roma's demographic evolution and social history in Romanian principalities remain scarce. One of the things most of these studies have in common is their treatment of Roma as passive objects. Conversely, my research attempts to restore Roma's voices in 19th century debates concerning the adoption of emancipation laws. More concretely, I am bringing to the reader's attention the role of Romani slaves' formal requests for legal emancipation in Valachian courts in the broader struggle for resisting enslavement. So why I'm saying this? Because in general, Roma were presented like spectators of their own history. But what I consider that is very important to bring in the attention of the general public was the fact that the Roma, during the slavery and also during the Holocaust, reacted. So I will also present you a very interesting case study on this point. Between the late 14th and early 19th century, the relation between slaves, masters, and other inhabitants of the Romanian Principality were regulated by both customary and written laws. In the eyes of the law, slaves were considered the property of their masters, be they the princes that ruled the land, rich monasteries, or powerful noblemen, poets, and represented a source of free and cheap labor. The master's dominion also extended over the slaves marital choices, sometimes with devastating effects. So, one Roma woman, Ioana Ticula sau rudărea sa, she fought in the court for her freedom and for the freedom of their children. She fought with the boyars in a trial that lasted more than 10 years. What we intend now, the National Center of Roma Culture, to do is to realize an artistic field, because also we consider that it's important to have heroes from that period, and also it's important to have instruments in order to educate the general public. Also, I want to underline the fact that if we do not look in the history, it is hard to understand the stigma that was put on Roma for centuries. And why I'm saying this, also Professor Marius Turta mentioned, but I want to ask you, do you think that could be a link between slavery and Roma Holocaust in Romania? Also, we are writing an article about this, so if Marius allows me, I will just present some ideas. Regarding the Roma deportation to Transnistria from Romania, we know that were deported like 10% of the Roma that were living in 1942 in Romania. So the rest of the Roma were accepted. But if we look in the archive documents concerning the Holocaust in Romania, it's easy to understand the fact that the government from that period decided to deport and to have a racial and eugenic approach on the Roma that could not be assimilated during the centuries of the slave. So, what we understand is the fact that for the Romanian authorities during the time was really difficult to understand that Roma, they really have a culture, they indeed are another people with their own customs and so on. Why I'm saying this? Because I don't know if, I'm sure that many people from you, you know about the fact that the slaves were of three types. Of the boyars, of the monasteries, and of the prince. The slaves of the prince, they had, I would say, another status, in the sense that they were allowed to practice their crafts. So they would pay just a tax to the prince. If we look in the ethnography, it's really easy to understand the fact that the Roma that were the slaves of the prince, they kept their traditions, their language, their customs. And this is the reason for which today we still see Roma that they have their traditional customs and so on, clothes and so on. So we understand that the idea of liberty is quite linked with expression of the cultural identity. But during the Antonescu regime, the first ones that were deported to Transnistria were the traditional Roma, I mean the Roma, the nomads Roma. So they were deported entirely without any exception. And also there were sociologists that they were written about the nomad Roma that it is impossible to assimilate them. We must keep one or two families in a special reservation to not lose the country such an exotic people. But in rest, we must deport them along the territory of outside the territory of Romania. Concerning the second category of Roma that were deported, the sedentary Roma, they were labeled as thieves, as people useless for the society. But if we look in the archive documents from the period of slavery, and we are doing this at the National Center of Roma Culture, where we created an online database with archive documents. So if we look in the slavery period, we will see that the police from that time had a special interest in gypsies. So it's really easy to understand that Roma were criminalized during the entire history in the Romanian territory. So, in order to shape the social memory of the slavery, we must attack some very important points, and one of them is the fact to, I don't know if it's the right word, but this is to combat the historiography that is not speaking in a right way about what slavery was. Because why I'm saying this? Because for many times the Roma slavery is compared with other types of serfdom that existed on the territory of the Romanian municipalities. So there are historians that are saying, yes, it was true, existed slavery in Romania, but also in Romania there were another types of serfdom, and also the Romanians were in almost similar situation. But this is not true, because slavery was different from this. So what I wanted to point is the fact that in order to give to the general public a correct form on what slavery meant for the Roma people and also for the Romanian people. Why I'm saying this? Because we speak today about the impact of the slavery on the Roma communities and on the Roma culture and so on. But it's very important to understand the impact of the slavery also on the Romanian mentality. Because we could ask ourselves what meant for the Romanians in the 19th century to treat like equals a people that for centuries they were not considered humans. So the legacy of the slavery is very powerful. So I will and by it's a fact. So we published last year a short collection of documents with descendants of children during the slavery. So last days, I remember how the Roma children are named in the Romanian collective mental. So the name used in the Romanian collective mental to make reference to the Roma children is Puratel. So this is a very powerful word because I mean a Puratel, it's just a gypsy child. It's not on the same level with the idea of what the children means. And why? Because we saw the Roma children were sold for centuries. So I will end with the conclusion that Roma will have a correct image, and I mean a correct image. They will have a true image in the moment when they will be represented in the public space. So I'm speaking about monuments, I'm speaking about museums, and about all the forms that the institutions of the Romania can do in order to educate the general public and also the Roma that are living in Romania with regard about this common history, because it's not only our history, it's a common history. So this is the point for which I saw a work that was published at the University of Iași. So it's a work on the 19th century, and it's about the social memory of the revolution from 1848. It was very important. But no mention about slavery. And we know that all those intellectuals from that period, that they contributed to the revolution, they wanted to abolish the slavery. But in this book that was published in a very important university from Romania, the slavery is not mentioned, and the impact of the revolution on slavery isn't mentioned. And why I'm saying this? Because when we want to present some other documents from related to slavery, we present a diploma of regulation from 1848. So this is what I wanted to share with you, the fact that it's very important to continue the research on Roma slavery, the historical research, but also the sociological research that also I'm doing now, and I want to share with you the fact that I found on the field special churches that were built for the Roma slaves, because they were forbidden to enter in the monasteries. So the church is like 500 meters away from the monasteries. For the monastery to not be the image damaged by the presence of the Roma slaves. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I will stop now.
Before ending this session, that was, we apologize for being too long, all the three of us, but actually the subject topic is very, very important for us, and also very emotional, and also very, very important in this matter. So allow me to end the session, but before I try to answer the question of our colleague, it is a link between the slavery and the Holocaust. Yes, the collective memory of the Roma survivors of the Holocaust says that it is, because they say what was our position when we were taken and deported to Transnistria. We were working on the landowners' lands. We were working there as like slaves, they said. And Antonescu decided to sell us as slaves to the Russians who were there. So there is no gap in the collective memory of the Roma survivors of the Holocaust between slavery and deportation and Holocaust. So we were slaves and we were deported as slaves. And there are many, many testimonials like this. So we were, of course, we were sold like slaves to the Russians because we were as slaves on the lands of the boyars. So this very short time of emancipation between the world wars, the organizations and newsletters and the newspapers that I spoke about is not so much for the collective memory of the Roma. From slavery to Holocaust, that's a very short time. There's no gap in the collective memory. It's just normally this was, of course, what could they do to us? We were nobody. But there are many others. But I just wanted, as a conclusion of this session, thank you very much. Again, I think that we have no time for questions and answers. Unfortunately, we will prospect the other session or without waiting a week. And maybe in the end, some questions and answers. Thank you very much.
The other thing about not having questions now is that you know the people that you need to go and see. And you can see all your questions and form relationships with their organisations, and in some cases use your programme funding to help in many of the projects that they're engaged in, which have an urgent need for funding. Delia, Adrian and Marius, thank you very much indeed for really powerful messages. I'm sure for all of us, a huge amount of material that we didn't have before. And for helping us on this journey. So we're going to abandon question and answer, we're going to abandon break and ask Sarah to start the next session. Please take your comfort breaks throughout as you can. There is coffee and tea, feast up yourselves, and we will try and recoup time so that we get as close to the expected time as possible. But actually the most important thing I think is having the opportunity to listen to these extremely well-informed perspectives. And we will emerge as better diplomats as a result. But also, actually, I find myself being given material with which to think about my own society. And I think the idea that it's not just Roma who needs to be helped with the question of stigma, but those who did the stigmatizing who need to be helped. In a way, if one compares it to what's happening in my country and in the United States, for example, we need to teach white supremacists how not to be white supremacists, to just put it in a slightly heightened way.
The table of discussion, as we could say, for the second panel, Building a Safer Space for Minorities, the legal framework, effectiveness in combating and preventing hate speech against the Roma minority. So I will now kindly ask our speakers to join the table. Your Excellencies, Madam Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, both present with us in an online format and with physical attendance, welcome to the second part of today's agenda, building a safer space for minorities, the legal speech against the Roma minority. My name is Sara Vasile, advisor to the Secretary of State, Departamentul, the second part of the discussion. We have had the opportunity in the first part of today's agenda to hear a series of powerful contributions in terms of historical impact of the ethnic and social stigma for the Roma minority, and I would like to thank all the previous speakers in this regard. The second panel of discussion will have a more practical approach, therefore we will be concentrating on the causes, scales and impact of the hate speech against minorities, particularly regarding the Roma minority, the effectiveness of the legislative framework in this area, the role and responsibility of the governmental and non-governmental environment in preventing and combating hate speech, particularly regarding the Roma minority, and last but not least, a series of proposals and recommendations of best practice examples in addressing, preventing and combating hate speech. Each contribution has an allocated time of between 5 and 10 minutes, and I am thanking you in advance for your cooperation in this regard. We are already short on time. This being said, I will now give the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Caterina Olteanu, from the member of the National Council for Combating Discrimination Boards. Ms. Olteanu's presentation title is Why Roma Minority is Still Waiting for Claiming Their Rights. And in her presentation, she will address the following topics: real facts about Roma integration, how to overcome the statistics, and the key role of the Roma women in addressing ethnic stigma. Ms. Olteanu, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know.
Dr. Martin Luther King said many years ago, not so many years ago, for years now I have heard the word wait. This wait has almost always meant never. Also, he said justice too long delayed is justice denied. I was 20 years old when I heard for the first time my own history as a Roma woman in a school system. In the school system, the Romanian system. And I was very lucky because I graduated the foreign languages, Romani, Spanish, and the Romani is my mother tongue. So there I found out my own history, because before that I never knew anything about my minority. When I learned for the first time about Ștefan cel Mare, was a big ruler in Romania, and his fights, I should have learned also about the Roma slaves. When I have learned about the 1948 revolution and the independence war, I should have learned also about the abolition of the Roma slavery in Romania. Or when Romania became a nation in 1918, and I should have learned also about my people, that they waited until 1990 to kindly ask not to mention Țigan. Or when Roma soldiers were fighting on the Second War and others were deported and killed, I should have learned at school this information. But still, we are waiting. For many years we have heard that Roma must be included in society, but also for many years Roma strategies were designed for the beginning to fail. Why? I think we know the answer. Because the strategy, and my colleague is here, is without budget. So we cannot do anything without money. But still, the Romanian government seek the inclusion. And the results are, according to our fifth article of the Romanian Constitution, Romania is the common homeland of all his citizens, regardless of race, nationality, ethnic origin, language, religion, sex, opinion, political affiliation, wealth, or social origin. Citizens are equal before the law and public authorities, without privileges and without discrimination. No one is above the law. And still, we are waiting. The statistics are not my favorite, regarding the Roma, of course. All the time, we are the first. Discrimination, low participation on the labor market, access to education, segregation, low quality education, evictions, no access to infrastructure, no access to higher education, early marriages, and we can go further like that. We are the first, always. But what about the other part of the story? How we can overcome these statistics? Real facts that I want to share with you today is that I also was a number on those statistics. And now I'm sitting here. I'm not an exception. I think we have to take the worst numbers from the statistic and transform them in the positive numbers, because we need positive numbers. We need to treat Roma as citizens, as a group, but not as a vulnerable group. And we are not waiting anymore. Also, Martin Luther King said, we know through painful experiences that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed. The Roma minority needs to be seen as a group of citizens with equal rights. And I would like also to introduce the topic that I'm very close to this. It's about Roma women. When we talk about Roma women, in general, we talk about early marriages, culture, tradition, lack of education, and so on. That's it about Roma women. I do believe it's the time to change the story. And it's the time to see that the Roma women are playing a key role in addressing the social and ethnic stigma that we are confronting. To tell the story, I think it's the time to tell the story of our mothers as workers, as those who are fighting for their rights, those who are facing multiple discrimination, because you know, being a Roma woman or being a Roma woman, a poor Roma woman, it's very hard. Then you have to fight the system, being a Roma woman. Studies reveal the fact that when a woman has access to education and financial resources, she can do amazing things to her family and also for the whole society. Then I think it's at the end of my short presentation, because I think all of us, we are aware of what the real situation of Roma minority in Romania is. And I will also give the floor to my colleagues, and they will show to us a lot of best practice examples or not. They are like empower Roma women to become more than numbers. I think it's important, and it's call for action to do this for the next period. Strategies can be implemented, but not only on paper. we have to do strategies with budget. And I share with you from the point of view of my institution, the National Council for Combating Discrimination in Romania. We don't have budget for the Roma strategy for the next period. And we need to develop tools that can improve the intercultural dialogue among citizens, among all the citizens in Romania. Because before being a Roma minority or other minority in Romania, I think all of us, we are citizens. And we need to treat ourselves as citizens, because we are not waiting anymore. Thank you. And now, Sarah?
Thank you. Thank you for this powerful presentation, for this open invitation to a call of action, and for sharing with us both your professional and your personal background. I will now invite to take the floor Mr. Daniel Radulescu, President, National Agency for Roma.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Caterina, for raising some subjects to discuss with our friends. So, first of all, Your Excellency, thank you very much for inviting us here, and Ms. State Secretary, for organizing this debate, because in the last more than 2 years, we faced with some problems regarding, debate. All the debates that are related with social problem, Roma as a social problem, not as a minority group. And in the last period, we tried to put on the agenda the necessity to discuss about Roma as a minority group, not as a social group. Not all of us are poor, not all of us were thieves, or not all of us were traveling outside, trying to do bad things. So, my name is Daniel Radulescu, I am the president of the National Agency for Roma. I am Roma, I am proud, and for me, in the last 3 years, it's most impossible to represent just the institution, because I am Roma and I have a moral duty to be open and frank with you, and to discuss open about the realities. I want to congratulate my colleague Adrian for the presentation, the Professor Turda and Delia for the introduction, and of course my colleague Caterina. Now, because the time is short to debate about Roma situation, maybe we need more time, not just 3-4 hours, maybe weeks, maybe years. Why? Because the Roma minority from Romania, here it's about the diversity of the Roma from Romania. We are traveling outside, going to different conferences, and we hear this voice. Let's prepare, not voice, messages. Let's prepare public policies for Roma, Unfortunately, for the European society, Roma are citizens. So, if we treat Roma as a social problem, without knowing, their history, their problems, going in the community, discussing with them, it's impossible to create public policy staying in the office. So, in 2018, I was invited by DG Justice to discuss in the Roma platform about the new strategic vision of the Romanian government for Roma from Romania. And after a few speeches, I said, okay, I have to change my speech. My colleagues, they prepared me a speech. But I said, no, it's time to say stop and to think about a new approach, because we need a new approach. Because Caterina mentioned about strategies. Of course, we need a strategy, to start to work, but the strategy to be implemented, this is important, not just to have some words on the paper and to say that, okay, we assume that Roma, they face with different problems and we have a will to solve the problems. In my experience, I'm involved in Roma movement more than 20 years. My colleagues, we grew up in Roma movement. I can say that half of my life was spent in the Roma movement. I learned something, but not just reading, you know, seeing with my own eyes what's happening in the field. At the local, at the central level, we have a strategy. From my point of view, this strategy is important. Why? Because it's, let's say, a political document, if it's possible to say like that. And it's a tool for the county authorities and the local authorities to develop their own action plans based on their realities. I told you, Roma from Romania, and my colleagues, they told you already, we are different. We are more than 19 subgroups of Roma, and sometimes in the same subgroup there are huge differences. You know, for example, Călărașii from Sibiu, they are different than Călărașii from Moldavia. So this is important for us to involve and to ask the local authorities to be active involved in the planning process. The National Agency for Roma is not a Roma minister for Roma. We are a technical assistant unit working under the Prime Minister. Our role is to offer the technical assistance to the local authorities, county authorities, and central authorities involved in this process of solving problems. When our duty is not to solve the Roma problems, our duty is to support the authorities responsible for implementing public policies in the benefit of their own citizens. I will try to go to the end because it's important to have a debate. Just a few words about what's happened next. We are preparing in this moment a new strategic vision for the Roma situation, for the Roma social movement. We decided because we said it's important to invite the Roma civil society to be part of this process. And we decided to change a little bit and this is, Joe is guilty for that, and not just Joe. We have few friends who are working with us, you know, to develop this new strategy. And we said, okay, the Roma, they are Romanian citizens. So based on the principle of active citizenship and the principle of non-discrimination and integrated approach, we said the main domains as education, health, social, you know, to be addressed as a mainstream approach. And what is targeting for us and clear for us, it's to work on culture and non-discrimination. This will be a targeting approach. Why? And of course that they are cross-cutting, so we find this two approaching all these four domains. But it's important to start to discuss about us. We have a moral duty for our children, you know, to leave, you know, something in the back, to put in the manuals in the school, you know, some things about Roma. Because our new generation, they put a lot of questions. Why? Because they have this tool, you know, the phone, you know, the access of the internet, you know, to discover, they discover things and they put questions. So sometimes I am not able to answer to my daughters, you know, some things about Roma. And every time when I listen to my colleagues who are research, you know, and to find things about Roma, for me it's something new, because I didn't have the chance to learn in school about this. And my role as a president is to put on our colleagues from the Romanian government on their desk, or their table, you know, a new strategic vision based on the realities, and to put pressure on the local level, and of course county level, you know, to the authorities, you know, to implement activities based on their realities. I told you, not all the Roma are the same. We are different, and as my colleague said in the Holocaust period, you know, who was deported? The nomad, yes, and now the situation is the same. If you go in the field, you will see the same situation. And I will ask, and I will give you another short example, because I am not the president who like to stay in the office. Every week I'm in the field trying to see the reality and to see what is the problems that the mayors or city halls they face, you know, in order to develop action plans. They don't have experience. who are responsible for developing the action plan at the local level. Sometimes the local Roma local expert, who is a person from the community without any knowledge, or health mediators, or school mediators, or somebody who loves with yes, Roma. Now it's time to change this approach, because the Roma, they are part of the society. We are part of this society. We contribute to the society. We are living in the society, and our children, they are the future adults who will pay taxes and for the society. And this is important to learn how to invest in these communities, which this is mean, to develop let's say, modern society. Thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, please back here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Radulescu, for addressing the importance of the governmental responsibility in preventing and combating hate speech. Our next speaker is Mr. Dan Pavel Doghi, Team Leader, Non-Discrimination and Roma Coordination Unit, Digit Justice and Consumers, European Commission. Mr. Doghi will join us with an online intervention, and I would like to thank him as well as our online speakers for their patience and for staying with us until the end of the conference. Mr. Doghi, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, dear Sala Vasile, for giving me the floor. I salute all my friends and colleagues, Roma and non-Roma, whom I know personally. I also take the opportunity to congratulate the Department for Interethnic Relations for organizing a discussion on such a meaningful topic. Not only meaningful, I would say even uncomfortable topic for the Romanian society, but I would not point only to Romania as such, because when we speak about Roma, the attitude of rejection and reluctance is a constant throughout Europe, unfortunately. I put down some words and ideas, and I would like to share with you. So I will just read them out. Stigma is an extremely powerful and long-lasting sentiment and big dilemma, a serious predicament. We, the Roma, myself and I guess many others present in today's event, have painfully felt it through our lives. We continue to struggle with it at a personal level, but also with it as a phenomenon that affects the Roma people generally, but it also affects the Romanian society as a whole and the interethnic relations of our country. Internalization of stigma is real, and it affects how you see and perceive the world around you, and how eventually you position yourself in relation to others, especially those projecting the stigma upon you. As a racial ideology, stigma is a social, cultural, and academic construct projected and imposed historically by a group over another, predominantly by a majority over a minority. Concerning the Roma, the associated stigma attached to them has in the past and continues to intentionally attribute to them a wide array of negative characteristics, portraying them as being inferior intellectually and as a falsely perceived race, being unworthy and undeserving of respect and entitlements as citizens. De facto being considered as second-class citizens. Roma are called and considered as being inherently deviant. I give here an example of a high-level state dignitary in Romania who stated that criminality among the Roma is physiological. Roma, or as often called derogatorily, Țigan, are accordingly lazy and dirty, exploiting and overburdening the social welfare system, they are thieves, they are savage and dangerous, or even a risk to public safety, as well as a risk to the public health, as we recently witnessed during the pandemic. The mechanisms used to promote, to enforce and perpetuate the stigma upon the Roma are diverse and cover both formal and informal frameworks of our society. They include very early socialization of children within their family. Children learn from early stages to be afraid of the Roma. The kindergarten, the playground, the school, and later on the work collective, they all play a role in perpetuating and reinforcing the stigma relating to Roma. Mass media plays a very important role in perpetuating prejudice, stereotypes, sometimes even openly inciting hatred against the Roma, and oftentimes engaging in generalization and exaggeration, looking for sensationalism. Mass media is also known to engage in misinformation and disinformation, intentional disinformation. And also, as recently witnessed during the pandemic, where Roma were portrayed in Romania, as in other countries, as being responsible for spreading the virus. I would like to reiterate what Professor Marius Turna also stated, the fact that Romania needs to come to terms with its past by fully and transparently acknowledging the historical truths concerning the Roma, which included 5 centuries of slavery and failing to remedy and compensate for that. Later on, persecution, deportation, and genocide as part of the Holocaust, the following exclusion, racism and discrimination that continues nowadays, unfortunately. Stigma will not go away simply by itself. To stand a real chance to overcome it, the stigma needs, in its entirety, as a social and cultural mechanism, to be openly and publicly challenged. It needs to be challenged to sustain efforts and by employing a variety of approaches among them. And this responds also to the key points of this panel. Among them, targeted policies and measures promoting diversity, developing teaching and educational materials that are reflecting properly on these historic realities, and then are used throughout the education process at all levels, coupled also with public awareness raising, civil education, and intercultural dialogue. Other measures include the establishment of initiatives focusing on revealing historic truths, promoting remembrance of significant episodes concerning the Roma in the history, and building frameworks and processes focusing on historic reconciliation and building of trust and mutual understanding between the Roma and mainstream populations. Further, it relates to the establishment of institutions for self-representation on aspects relating to history, culture, particularly in the form of establishment of museums and theaters. As Daniel Radulescu, president of the National Agency for Roma, perhaps more advanced in addressing these issues. I encourage that such a debate is continued with a wider audience and wider participation of various ministries that have direct responsibility over addressing this issue of stigma. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dogi, for highlighting, among other topics of interest, the importance of the reconciliation with the historical past. Thank you for your perspective and experience and for sharing us this information. So I will now give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Cătălin Mihalache, Associate Officer on Roma and Sinti Issues at OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Mr. Mr. Mihalaki will be joining us with an online intervention. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Mrs. Vasiles, thank you for giving me the floor. I would also want to thank for the invitation to the co-host of the conference, to His Excellency Ambassador Novo, and also to the Secretary of State, Ms. Lotko, for the invitation, and also to congratulate for the initiative to co-host this event. I also wanted to congratulate the British Embassy to Bucharest, which joined other British embassies in other OSCE participating states with size of the Roma population for their initiative to celebrate and raise awareness of this year's International Roma Day on 8th of April, marking 50 years since the first International Roma Congress. At the same time, I wanted to thank the Department of Interethnic Relations for our good cooperation last year, and also to note their important initiative, also linked to the theme of this event, to undertake monitoring of attitudes of exclusion, intolerance, and extremism towards national minorities in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also followed up by the report produced and published. I want to mention that we appreciate the efforts of the permanent representation of Great Britain to the OSCE, which in recent years has been leading the work of our Human Dimension Committee in Vienna. It is also important to acknowledge the relevance of the theme that we are discussing today, as also stressed by the previous speakers, and to the fact that such discussion with relevant stakeholders, including decision makers, is quite timely. Stigma rooted in racism and discrimination and leading to exclusion in relation to the situation of Roma and Sinti, not only in Romania but also in other OSCE participating states. Comprehensive efforts to address such issues have to stand at the core of any consistent policy processes. I would want to very briefly point to a number of OSCE commitments undertaken by participating states, including by Romania, in the context of promoting tolerance and non-discrimination. Some commitments, as mentioned, have been taken also in relation to hate speech. And I would recall decision on tolerance and non-discrimination from a ministerial council meeting in 2006, which, I would quote here, condemns in strongest terms all manifestation of aggressive nationalism, racism, chauvinism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and violent extremism, as well as hate speech. And also participating states in the same document decided to take, and quote here, to take strong public positions against hate speech and other manifestations of aggressive nationalism, racism, chauvinism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and violent extremism, as well as occurrences of discrimination based on religion and belief. Also Maastricht in 2003. There is a mentioning of full respect of freedom of expression, but at the same time to the fact that the OSCE will strive to combat hate crime, which can be fueled by racist, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic propaganda on the internet. And I guess, considering recent developments, this is a quite relevant provision. Also, there is a recognition of the fact that there is a need to combat hate crimes which can be fueled by racist, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic propaganda on the internet. Also, it is relevant to mention that in the relevant OSCE commitments related to Roma and Sinti, namely in the OSCE Action Plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti, there is a recommendation that participating states undertake a series of measures in relation to media, such as to encourage the media to show positive aspects and present a balanced portrayal of Roma life, to refrain from stereotyping Roma and Sinti people, and to avoid inciting tension between various ethnic groups. Because we can recall here situations, and I will come back to that, when such manifestation have led to undesired and unwanted escalation of ethnic tension into interethnic conflict, and this is not something that anybody would want to happen anymore. I would also want to point to a number of relevant findings of the report that ODIHR has published last year in relation to OSCE human dimension commitments and state responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the report notes that, quote here, against the backdrop of widespread fear caused by the health crisis, there have been a surge of manifestations of prejudice and racism, coupled with some authorities undertaking hasty and biased measures against such groups, including Roma and Sinti. At times, they were abusively labeled as a hazard to public safety, undisciplined, and spreading the virus, as mentioned also by previous speakers. Also, it is relevant to note another finding of the report, quote here, adding to already existent social and economic vulnerability, manifestations of racism and discrimination, often violent, have been reported in a number of participating states since the outbreak of the pandemic. And here it is relevant to note, quote here, many such incidents stem from restrictions measures imposed by authorities, as well as by increased anti-Roma rhetoric in the public arena, including online and not infrequently by public officials, media, and opinion leaders. Anti-Roma rhetoric in the public arena further contributing to fueling hate and intolerance. Unabated hate speech inciting people against Roma have the potential to lead to hate crime and racially motivated violence. As I said before, such attitudes and such hate speech can actually lead to violence and racially motivated violence and hate crime. It is also important to note that the report noted that the outbreak of the pandemic was accompanied by a surge in inflammatory articles in European media that portrayed Roma in a biased and negative manner. In this, Roma are often scapegoated and blamed for the spread of the disease, for irresponsible and negligent behavior, and for disregarding social distancing measures. Even though non-compliance with the imposed measure was common and widespread, the case of Roma were highly publicized and presented as a risk to the majority population. A number of media outlets resorted to the use of anti-Roma discourse, also racist and discriminatory articles in TV broadcasts were prominent and amplified further through their extensive dissemination on social media platforms. In relation to that, in last year, in 2020, our institution has supported the monitoring of the portrayal of Roma in the media, where a number of 500 news were registered in 11 European countries, including Romania. And we have looked whether, one, Roma were fairly depicted in the media, and two, if the COVID-19 pandemic had an impact on this portrayal. The collected information actually revealed that 41% of hate speech cases were registered immediately when the first quarantine measures have been imposed in March, April 2020.
Mr. Michalak, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm kindly asking you if you would and could to shorten a bit the presentation, as we are already short on time. Thank you very much for your understanding.
Okay, sure. I will just take 2 more minutes. I will conclude my presentation. I just want to welcome recent developments related to the adoption of a number of important instruments in Romania, and I'm talking here about the law on prevention and combating of anti-Gypsyism, about the approval of the national strategy for the prevention of and combating of anti-Semitism, xenophobia, radicalization, and hate speech, as well as the current process for the adoption of the new strategy for the inclusion of Roma that the National Agency for Roma is working on, and in particular to the fact that this has a plan of measures for combating discrimination, anti-Roma attitudes, and hate speech. We consider that these are all important developments. Just quickly, I will provide also a few recommendations. It is important that racial and ethnic hatred, anti-Roma sentiment, xenophobia, and discrimination against Roma are strongly and unequivocally condemned, and that violations of human rights do not enjoy impunity. There is a need to develop measures to promote and protect human rights while actively countering racism and discrimination against Roma. It is also important to continue to cooperate with media outlets and other relevant stakeholders to promote the balanced portrayal of Roma within media, as well as to combat hate speech, including anti-Roma rhetoric and incitement to hate. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mihalke, for your contribution. We would also like, the Department for Interethnic Relations would also like to thank the OSCE ODIHR office for its cooperation during our last activities since 2020. I will now give the floor to Mr. Cedu Duminică, sociologist, associate professor at the Sociology and Social Assistance Faculty, University of Bucharest. Thank you.
Thank you also. I'm trying to keep as short as possible. So, summarizing, we talked about Roma, more or less, but I think we are talking about many. Because what we see as Roma challenges are in fact very much of the current situation. Marginalization, racism, discrimination, already mentioned second is the system, the political system, the governmental system, and all these kind of systems that are missing to tackle the diversity that exists inside of society. And they are thinking that we all Romanians are white, Christians, middle class, and all these kind of things. The reality is not in this way. The third is the lack of networking and the networks that are supposed to support these ideas of diversity, inclusions, blah, blah, blah. You know, sometimes it's easier to coagulate people in order to defend the street dog rights, and it's normal, it's necessary to be done, but it's harder to coagulate when you are talking about Roma. Because the prejudices, we come back to the first cause, are deeply rooted. In general, we are attacking the effects, poverty, migration, blah, 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 without to have in mind that these realities are created by something deeper. And you know, the theories and the realities show us that if we want to have a sustainable approach, we need to address the causes, not the effects. Maybe, and I'm sure that my colleagues are the subject of slavery, racism, hate speech, all these kind of things, just because of that, because these are the deeply rooted causes. If we look on the other societies with the same realities, we'll find out that the former slaves everywhere in the world face more or less the same realities. They are on the margins, they are never considering being equal with the others, etc., etc. And I think Marius Turta said that the oppressor already all the time fight for his right to claim, you know, his superiority to the others. And we can have in mind this also in this society. So it's not necessary to invent the wheel. We need only to adapt the wheel to the Romanian context and to do things. And here is the challenge. We don't have data regarding the Roma situation. You know, very few, you know, in general provided by NGOs. No sustainable mechanism, suitable mechanism in order to provide current data on different things. How many Roma are in I don't know what situation? How many Roma are discriminated? How many Roma are still a part of this social trauma, you know, and they are still, how to say, connected with all these kind of things? How many Roma are visible? How many are invisible, etc., etc., etc. Without data, we cannot have progress. Without equitable action, you know, an equitable system, we cannot have progress. But in general, we tailor the same measures for all the people without having in mind that if we are not offering more to the people that are in need, the gaps will become bigger. It's not something Romanian, it's a sociological axioma. Everywhere in the world happens in the same way. And third, if we don't have supporters, no real change. Because we saw, and my colleagues already underlined, that our government experiment what other governments experimented in the past, resistance to change. So it's not something new. So why we are being specific? What is not specific? Because we need to do the same thing. What we are proposing, and when I say we, I'm saying our foundation, and I discussed that with Andrew, and I benefit of his support on this, is to start to build something we call it Roma Observatory. You know, something like an NGO body, civil society. I have in mind the Gellner's words, civil society and its freedom. And the Gellner said that the role of civil society is to counterbalance the power of state without to take the state role. So our role as civil society is to counterbalance the power of state, not to duplicate the state. We need to put pressure on the state. And for that, if you don't have data, I will provide you with data. If you don't create this kind of equitable policies, it's my duty to recommend you these kind of things. If you don't create core of supporters, it's my duty to try to push this core of supporters. And this we will do. You know, because the idea is to do something, not to wait for others to do. Yes, we need to provide data. And when we are talking about data, we are not talking only about socio-economic indicators. We are talking also about recovery history. We are talking about also arguments for historical reconciliations. Because what we have in this moment, and we need to put in practice the right actions in order to take as much as possible, is we have written of political will. It's written. And we fight for that for years, and anybody was one of our supporters, you know. And we have in this moment, in the governmental plans, issues and objectives that never were in the history of the modern Romania. Fighting with hate speech, fighting with anti-Roma discourse, recovering Holocaust, the history information regarding Holocaust, Romanism, Roma institutions, anti-discrimination measures, etc., etc. But if we don't know in this moment where are the secondary schools, what is the level of involvement? We don't know how many people are living and where, you know, in deep poverty, without water, without whatever you want. We don't know how many people are the victims of the police abuse. We don't know how many Roma are victims of I don't know what. We don't know. And we need to push. I really hope on the end of the year to be able to announce this, that we will take the stage, the second phase of the stage, from words to action. And I really hope, you know, your institutions to be supporters. On the last word, I really hope also in the issue of the slavery, Romania to be connected with the Republic of Moldavia, because the reality was the same there. So maybe, you know, for the entities that have arguments and financial arguments to interfere more with the Republic of Moldavia, can connect this also with Romania, because the reality, again, is the same, and everything I mentioned as causes are the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domingo, for your presentation. For the closing remarks of the second panel of discussion, building a safer space for minorities, the legal framework, effectiveness in combating and preventing hate speech against the Roma minority, I will give the floor to Madam Secretary of State, Ms. Relatii Interetnice, Department for Interethnic Relations. Unfortunately, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we are not able to project video of the latest campaign that the Department for Interethnic Relations is currently working on counter hate speech activities and combating and preventing hate speech, but we will make sure that we will transmit it via email with the link of the concept of the campaign, alongside with other relevant materials if it's the case. Ms. Secretary of State.
Thank you. I will try to be very short because I know you're waiting for a cup of coffee. You were here sitting for the last 3 hours at least or so. I would like to, I don't know whether you know about the Department for the smallest institution within the Romanian government which deals with minorities, but we have a lot of attributions. It's basically why we are here today. It's based on 3 main attributions. One of them is to monitor the implementation of both international and domestic legislation regarding the protection of national minorities. The second one is to promote the identity, the ethnic, cultural, linguistic identity, and even traditions and history of the national minorities. And third is to identify and to implement activities which aim to combat all sorts of all kinds of intolerance in the Romanian society. So basically, and this is why also what we are trying to do here today, and thank you again, Mr. Ambassador, for your cooperation, and thank you all of you for being here and for the presentation, is to, we are trying to develop some counter speech measures counter-speech measures which can work effectively and efficiently in the Romanian society. We realize that, yes, of course, we each and every time we have to react when intolerance appears in the Romanian society. We also recognize that the legislation, some part of it is good, but it's not applied. Some part of it should be amended and should be changed. For this, we don't know exactly by ourselves everything. Nobody knows exactly what to do. This is why we are here. We are trying to constantly discuss these things, to develop a functioning mechanism, to develop a functioning system for the protection of national minorities, which also includes combating any kinds of intolerance towards them. So basically, I will not enter into very technical details. You know that we have also amended the criminal code. We were the European Commission asked last year that asked Romania to modify it because it wasn't sufficient, it wasn't effective, it wasn't applied. We have such problems also with the law on anti-Semitism and several more. We have such a situation on other issues as well related to the identity of the minorities. But this is a long-going process. The evolution of the protection of national minorities is a constant process. It is never, it cannot stand at one point and we say, oh, we are done. What I wanted to add, and I will finish with that, is that I am very privileged. My institution and my colleagues within the institution, we have the possibility and the privilege to work based upon the needs of the communities. Okay, at one point we have the legislation, we have the mechanisms, we have the Romanian state, we have the rules of the Romanian government. But on the other hand, we can develop our activities based on the needs and based on the desiderates of the national minorities, which is very, very important for our decision-making process and for the activities that we implement. Mr. Ambassador, I would like to conclude here now and give the floor for final remarks. If you want, thank you all very much also, Sarah, for moderating this second discussion. And I'm sure that we can still continue at a cup of coffee, the discussions.
I think I've probably said enough already. Thank you to those who we can regard as the bitter enders who've stayed throughout this very rich discussion. Lots of information that we didn't have, but I think also lots of pointers for how we as embassies in Romania, involved in the life of Romania, can seek to assist, seek to draw on all of our knowledge to discuss better with Romania, with the Romanian government and with its agencies. So I would like to say a very big thank you to all of the participants. I'm sorry all of you are under such time stress. As was just said, we could easily have timetabled these discussions over several days. If we were academics, we would probably be having an academic conference of a week on it. And we will be able to come up with something much bigger. But I think what we've been able to sustain those dialogues over the weeks and months, and I'm sure that's what we'll be able to do. So Secretary of State, thank you very much indeed for, this is your event. I'm not really sure why I'm summing up, other than that we are very grateful for all of the cooperation that we enjoy with you and with everybody who has spoken today. Roma inclusion is one which seems to me to be fundamental to a happy outcome for Romania and a happy outcome for our relationships with Romania. So as we take forward the constructive thoughts that we've had today and how we can actually not just listen and learn but act for a better future. Thank you very much.